The highway between Ottawa and Kingston is straight and flat and mostly empty at 6 in the morning, and Colonel Aday's OB Chambers had driven it so many times in 23 years of service that she barely had to think about the road anymore. The sky was still dark in the west, pale orange bleeding in from the east, and the only sounds were the hum of the engine and the low murmur of the CBC morning broadcast she kept on, just loud enough to fill the silence. She had her uniform pressed and hanging in the back seat, her cap on the hook above the rear window. She was driving in civilian clothes, a dark wool coat, slim trousers, leather gloves folded on the passenger seat beside her. She had a briefing seat at CFB Kingston at 8:30. She was not running late. She was never late. The cruiser lights appeared in her mirror just past the Napanee exit. She checked her speed. She was at 101 kilometers per hour. The limit was 100. She eased off the gas, watched the blue and red swirl behind her, and pulled onto the shoulder, without drama, without questions, without the kind of dread that she knew a lot of people felt in moments like this. She had been pulled over once before 15 years ago outside of Petawawa. That had been a different kind of stop. She did not think about it often. The cruiser sat behind her for 2 full minutes before the doors opened. She watched in the mirror. 2 officers, both male. The one approaching her window was young, mid-20s at most, with the kind of walk that telegraphed authority before he'd earned any. The second one hung back, near the front of the cruiser, arms crossed, watching. She already had her license and registration out when the young officer reached her window. She lowered the glass. "Morning," she said. He didn't say good morning back. He looked at her, then at the interior of the car, then back at her. License and registration. She handed them over. He took them without looking at her, studied the license for longer than necessary, glanced up at her face, looked back down. "Where are you headed this morning?" "Kingston." "CFB Kingston." A pause. "What for?" "I have a briefing." Another pause. He was reading her registration now. The car was registered to Adize OB Chambers. It was a 2022 Volvo XC60. It was exactly the kind of car that should not have attracted a second glance on this highway at any hour. She kept her hands visible on the wheel and did not drum her fingers, even though some part of her very much wanted to. "Wait here," he said, and walked back to the cruiser. She waited. She turned the radio down. Through the rearview mirror, she could see the 2 officers talking, the second one gesturing, the young one nodding. 7 minutes passed. She knew because she watched the clock on the dash. When he came back, his energy was different. Not kinder, tighter. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle." She didn't move right away. "May I ask the reason?" "We received a report of a vehicle matching this description in connection with a theft at a rest stop about 40 kilometers back." She looked at him. "A theft? That's right. What kind of theft?" "I'm not at liberty to go into detail right now." "Step out of the vehicle, please." She unclipped her seatbelt slowly. She got out. The morning air was cold and sharp and smelled like diesel and frost. She stood beside the car and waited. The officer's partner was already moving toward them. Up close, he was older, late 30s, heavyset, with a sergeant's stripes, and the kind of face that looked permanently unimpressed. He looked at her the way some people look at things they've already made up their minds about. "You got any other ID on you?" the sergeant asked. "My driver's license should be sufficient. Anything that says what you do." She looked at him steadily. He didn't answer. He walked to the passenger side of her car, put his hands on the roof, and peered through the window. He could see the uniform hanging in the back. He could see the cap on the hook. He looked at them for a moment, and then looked back at her, and something in his expression shifted, not into recognition, but into a different kind of suspicion. "Whose uniform is that?" "Mine." "What branch?" "Canadian Armed Forces." He nodded slowly, the way people nod when they're deciding whether or not to believe something. "What rank?" She paused one beat. "Colonel." He made a small sound, not quite a laugh, not quite a scoff, something in between. He turned to the young officer. "Run a check on the plates," she said. "My plates are clean. My record is clean. You have my license in your hand, and you can see my registration is current. Can you tell me specifically what this stop is about?" "Ma'am, I'm going to ask you to stay calm." "I am calm," she said. And she was, in the way that 23 years of service teaches a person to be calm, not the calm of passivity, but the calm of someone who has stood in worse moments than this and knows that volume changes nothing. "I'm asking a procedural question. We're running a check." "On what?" The sergeant's jaw tightened. He didn't answer. He walked back to his cruiser. The younger officer stayed near her, keeping what he probably thought was a professional distance. She looked at the highway. A transport truck blew past and made the air shake. She thought about her briefing at 8:30. She thought about Brigadier General Harrington, who she was meeting at 9, and who ran the tightest schedule she'd seen in a senior officer and did not appreciate adjustments to it. She thought about calling ahead. She decided to give them 5 more minutes. The sergeant came back. "We're going to need you to come with us." She went very still. "Sorry? There are some questions. Am I being detained?" He blinked. It was a brief blink, barely a flicker, but she caught it. "It's a routine. Am I being detained?" she said again, not louder, clearer. "Ma'am, this doesn't have to be difficult. I'm not making it difficult. I'm asking you a direct question. If I'm being detained, tell me the grounds. If I'm not being detained, I need to be on my way." The 2 officers looked at each other. Something passed between them that she could not fully read: frustration, calculation, or something worse. The sergeant pulled out his cuffs. "Turn around, please." She looked at him for a long moment. She thought of the Brigadier General. She thought of the briefing room. She thought of the 17 other times in her career she had stood in a room, or on a road, or in a hallway, and waited for someone to catch up to the reality of who she was. She thought of what her father had told her when she was 9 years old, sitting at the kitchen table in their house in Brampton. The ones who try to make you small are the ones who are afraid of how much space you actually take up. Don't shrink, don't rage. Just stay yourself. The truth has a way of arriving. She turned around. She let them put the cuffs on. She did not say another word. They walked her to the cruiser and put her in the back seat. The door closed. The morning light was getting stronger now, pale gold on the flat fields, and she looked at it through the window and thought about nothing in particular. She had left her phone on the passenger seat of her car. The younger officer retrieved her bag, her briefcase, her phone, her keys, and put them in the front seat of the cruiser without being asked. She was grateful for that, at least. She unlocked her phone screen with her face and she made one call, not to a lawyer, not to a family member. She called the office of Lieutenant General Doris Beauchamp-Osey, Deputy Chief of Defence Staff, National Defence Headquarters, Ottawa. She had Beauchamp-Osey's direct line. She had had it for 6 years. "Doris," she said, when the line picked up on the second ring. "It's a daisy. I'm going to be late to Kingston. I need you to make a call to the OPP detachment at..." She glanced at the young officer in the front seat. "Which detachment is this?" The young officer half turned. "Napanee, the Napanee detachment. I'm currently in the back of one of their cruisers. I don't know all the details yet. I'll explain when I see you." She could hear Beauchamp-Osey's tone shift in the 2 seconds of silence that followed. When she spoke, her voice was quiet and completely level. "Are you all right?" "Yes, I'll call now." The line went quiet. "Adiz." Set the phone face down on her knee and looked out the window again. In the front seat, neither officer spoke for a moment. Then the sergeant's radio crackled. He picked it up. She couldn't hear what was being said on the other end, but she could see the back of his neck, and she watched the color change. What happened in the next 11 minutes happened quickly, even if it didn't feel like it from the inside. The sergeant got off the radio and made a call on his cell. His voice was low. He had turned away from the partition, but the cruiser was small and the morning was quiet, and she heard most of it. She heard the word colonel. She heard national defense. She heard deputy chief, which came out slightly strained. She heard what sounded like a supervisor's voice on the other end, though she couldn't make out words, only tone. And the tone was the sound of someone who has just received very unpleasant information and is working out what to do with it. The young officer in the passenger seat had gone completely still. The sergeant ended the call and sat for a moment with his hands on his thighs. Then he got out of the cruiser. He opened the rear door, her door, and stood there with his keys in his hand. "Colonel Obi Chambers," he said, his voice had changed. Not warmer, smaller. "There's been a misunderstanding." She looked at him. "We received information that was inaccurate. We should have. There was a procedural lapse in how we handled." He stopped. "I'm going to remove the restraints." She turned so he could reach the cuffs. He fumbled with the key. When they came off, she brought her hands in front of her, rubbed one wrist, and stepped out of the cruiser onto the gravel shoulder. The sun was fully up now. It was cold and clear and bright. On the highway, traffic had picked up. Commuters, transport trucks, The ordinary machinery of a Tuesday morning. She straightened her coat. She looked at the sergeant. "What was the original basis of the stop?" she asked. He hesitated. "We received a tip about a vehicle matching your description." "A tip from whom?" Another hesitation. "I can't speak to that at this point." "Was there ever a theft?" He didn't answer. He looked at a point somewhere past her shoulder. She nodded slowly. "I want documentation of this stop," she said. "The time, the location, the officers' names and badge numbers, the stated reason for the stop, and the basis for the detention. All of it." Yes, that can be arranged." "I don't want it arranged. I want it submitted formally. You know where to send it." She walked back to her car. She got in. She checked the time on the dash. It was 7:41. She could still make Kingston by 8:30 if she pushed it. She pulled out her phone and sent a message to Brigadier General Harrington's aide. "Running slightly behind. ETA 8:35. My apologies." Then she merged back onto the highway and drove. Colonel Adaisy Obi Chambers had joined the Canadian Armed Forces at 22, fresh out of the University of Toronto, with a degree in political science and a stubbornness that her mother had always said would either save her or sink her. It had saved her. She had done 3 overseas rotations, 2 in peacekeeping roles in the Middle East, 1 as part of a NATO training mission in Eastern Europe. She had commanded a company by 31, a battalion by 38. She had been cited twice for operational excellence, and once for leadership under fire, in circumstances she didn't talk about at dinner parties. She had served under 4 chiefs of defense staff, and outlasted most of the people who had told her, at various points in her career, that she was too young, or too stubborn, or too something for whatever she was trying to do next. Her parents had come to Canada from Nigeria in 1981, the year before she was born. Her father had been an engineer. Her mother had been a nurse for 31 years. They had settled in Brampton because it was where her mother's sister lived. And they had built a life there with the kind of deliberate, patient effort that she had watched her whole childhood and absorbed without knowing she was absorbing it. Her father had died 8 years ago. Her mother still lived in the same house in Brampton and still called on Sunday mornings and still asked, every single time, whether Adaisy was eating enough. She had never told her mother about the stop in Petawawa 15 years ago. She was not going to tell her about this one either. Not right away. Not until she had decided what she wanted to do with it. What she wanted to do with it was everything. She also knew that everything was not the point, and that patience was the most effective kind of force she had, which was something she had learned so many times in so many rooms that it had become something close to a reflex. She arrived at CFB Kingston at 8:33. She changed into her uniform in the parking lot, which she had done before in worse conditions. She walked into the briefing room at 8:38, and Brigadier General Harrington, who was famously unbothered by most things, looked up at her and then looked at her more carefully. "You all right, Obi Chambers?" "Yes, sir. Apologies for the time. You're not late." "Still, I prefer earlier." He gave her a look that said he believed neither statement entirely. And she gave him a look that said the subject was closed for now, and they got on with the briefing. The formal complaint was filed 4 days later, through channels that she knew how to navigate, because she had spent 2 decades learning exactly how things worked and where the pressure points were. She filed it precisely, without embellishment, with timestamps and the documentation she had requested at the scene, which arrived, as requested, within 48 hours. Because when Lieutenant General Beauchamp-Posey made a call, things happened with a certain velocity. The complaint named both officers. It named the detachment. It listed the stated reason for the stop, the absence of any supporting evidence, the decision to detain rather than release, and the application of restraints on a serving Canadian Armed Forces colonel in the absence of any legal basis that she had been informed of. It was 3 pages long, and it was devastating in the way that precise, factual documents are devastating, not because they are emotional, but because they are not. The OPP opened an internal review within a week. She heard from the Union Rep's office. She heard from the detachment commander, who called her himself, a man in his 50s named Bertrand Lacouture-Mills, who spoke carefully and said the word regrettable 3 times in the first 2 minutes of the call, which told her a great deal. She heard from her own chain of command, who were supportive in the way that institutions are supportive when they've been put in a situation they didn't ask for and are trying to respond correctly. She heard from a journalist at the Ottawa Citizen about 6 weeks in, who had picked it up through sources she couldn't identify. She said the same thing she said to everyone who asked. I trust the process to produce the right outcome. I'm not going to add to the temperature of this from the outside. That was true. She also believed that the process would produce the right outcome because she had made it very difficult for it to produce any other one. That was also true. Both things were simultaneously true, and she was comfortable with that. The younger officer, his name she learned, was Constable Drew Vasey, resigned before the review concluded. She was told he had cited personal reasons. She did not know whether to believe that. The sergeant's name was Dennis Calloway Reese. He had been with the OPP for 14 years. He did not resign. He was suspended without pay pending the outcome of the review, and when the review concluded, 7 weeks after it had opened, the finding was that both officers had failed to meet the standard required of them, that the stop lacked reasonable grounds, that the detention was unlawful, and that the application of restraints constituted an unnecessary escalation without evidentiary basis. Calloway Reese was dismissed. The detachment commander received a formal reprimand. A mandatory retraining protocol was initiated across 4 regional divisions. She read the findings on a Thursday morning in her office at National Defence HQ with a cup of coffee that had gone cold while she was reading. She set the document down. She looked out the window at the Rideau River, which was partly frozen, the grey water moving slowly between the ice at the edges. She thought about the stop. She thought about the 7 minutes she had watched on the clock. She thought about her father's kitchen table in Brampton, and the way winter light came through those windows on Sunday mornings, and the way her father used to fold his hands around his mug and say, "The truth has a way of arriving as though it were the most ordinary thing," which for him it was. She thought about Constable Vasey's face when she'd asked him which detachment they were at. He'd been young. He hadn't known what to do. She wasn't sure what she felt about him, which was unusual for her. She was usually clear about what she felt. She supposed that was something to sit with. She picked up her phone and called her mother. "A daze," her mother said, and there was coffee in her voice too, the Sunday morning kind. "It's Thursday. I know, I wanted to hear your voice." A pause. Her mother was 71 and had the sharpest emotional radar of any person Adaise had ever met, including the 2 intelligence officers she'd worked alongside in her second overseas rotation. "What happened?" "Nothing serious. I'm fine." "That's not what I asked," she told her. "Not everything." She left out the cuffs. She left out the shoulder of the highway. She simplified the middle section considerably, but she told her enough. Her mother listened without interrupting, which was rare and significant. When she finished, there was a long pause. "You called Doris first," her mother said. "I did. Not me, it wasn't that kind of call." Another pause. "No," her mother said. "I suppose it wasn't." She could hear her mother's breath, slow and steady. "Your father would have been angry," she said finally. "He would have wanted to go down there himself." "I know. I'm not angry," her mother said. "I'm tired. There's a difference. I know that too. But I'm glad you called, even on a Thursday." She stayed on the phone for 40 minutes. Her coffee stayed cold. Outside the window, a single piece of ice that drifted down the center of the Rideau River, turning slowly in the current. 6 months later, she was promoted to Brigadier General. The ceremony was at Ottawa's Carty Square Drill Hall on a grey April afternoon with a ceiling of cloud that kept threatening rain and never delivered. Her mother was there in the front row, wearing the good coat, the burgundy one that only came out for things that mattered. Her brother Marcus, who worked in infrastructure in Hamilton and who had not been able to get to Ottawa in 3 years, had driven up that morning and arrived 20 minutes before the ceremony started, breathless and apologetic and impossible not to forgive. Her former commanding officer from her first posting, a retired Major General named Silvestre, was there too, which surprised her and touched her more than she let show. Lieutenant General Beauchamosi pinned the stars and said the appropriate things, and then said something that was not entirely appropriate for the formality of the occasion, which was, "You have been exactly as difficult as the institution needed you to be." I mean that as a compliment. The room laughed. Adaise did too. Afterward, standing with her mother and Marcus and a glass of sparkling water she kept forgetting to drink, her brother said, "You should have told us sooner. About the highway. I'm telling you, now, 6 months later. That's my pace." He shook his head, but not unhappily. Her mother reached over and squeezed her arm, once, the way she had done since Adize was a child. The way that meant, I see you, and I'm proud of you, and you don't have to say anything back. She didn't say anything back. Sergeant Dennis Calloway Reese had taken her for someone he could get away with disrespecting. That was the real calculation, not a misidentification, not a genuine mistake, but a decision about who was worth the trouble of due process and who wasn't. The uniform in the back seat should have been enough. The license should have been enough. The word of a woman standing calmly on the shoulder of a highway at 6 in the morning, with her registration in order and her hands visible, should have been enough. But sometimes it isn't. And when it isn't, when the machinery runs the wrong way, and the person at the center of it has the patience and the standing and the knowledge to put it right, the system catches up. Slowly, imperfectly, but it catches up. The call to Beauchamp Aussi did not create the outcome. It made it impossible to delay. The outcome was already determined the moment Calloway Reese decided who he thought he was dealing with, and what he thought he could do about it. He was wrong on both counts, and the wrongness was always going to surface. Not because of who she was, but because of what she knew, and what she was willing to do, and what she refused to become in the middle of it. She refused to shrink. She refused to rage. She stayed herself. Her father was right about that. He was right about most things. There are people in this country, in every city, on every highway, who face moments like the one Adize Obi Chambers faced, and who don't have a direct line to a lieutenant general, and who don't have 23 years of institutional knowledge at their back, and who are not wrong in the ways they feel about that. That gap is real. That gap is something we should be talking about far more than we do. But here is what is also true. The calm she kept was hers. The knowledge was hers. The decision to stay present and precise and undiminished, that was not conferred by rank. That was built year by year, choice by choice, over the course of a life. No one gave it to her. No one could have taken it. You can carry something like that too. It doesn't require stars on your shoulder. It requires knowing who you are well enough that someone else's mistake about you doesn't become your emergency. That is what this story is really about. If it moved you, if you've stood on a shoulder of a road somewhere and felt the weight of being underestimated, leave a comment below. Tell us what you did with it. Tell us what you kept. And if you believe that the people who protect this country deserve to be treated with the same dignity they give to their service, share this. Because that story deserves more voices than just one.